Okay, 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, everybody. 1 o'clock here in North Carolina, and it's Tuesday, so we're going to get into or continue our study of Homer's Iliad today. I told you in the first meeting or two, I told you in the beginning of this study, we're going to go very slow because there's just so much new material to learn as we get into English literature. It's why if you're an older student and you've started taking this course, you get off to a very slow start, and it's very difficult because this reading is very difficult because first of all, it's poetry, so that makes it difficult to begin with. And then secondly, there's just so much new information in this reading that when we sit down and try to you think you're just going to sit and start reading, and you realize that you can't make any progress. It's because you really have to have these lessons taught to you and explained, or you end up spending all of your time looking stuff up and trying to figure out what in the world you're reading about. So I said we're going to start slowly, and then over time it'll pick up and get faster and faster because it will become familiar to you. So we're still working in book one. We're moving slowly through it and making sure we understand everything we come across in the reading. And within a few books, I think you'll just about know everything that's in the story to know, and the reading will get much easier, much faster. And then when we get to the second work that we study in English literature, Homer's Odyssey, you'll already be familiar with all the places and people and things like that. So that'll be much easier. And then when we get to Virgil's Aeneid, which we study after the Odyssey, we'll sort of have to start all over again and learn, because there's a lot of new stuff. The story goes in different directions and things like that. So we're in book one of Homer's Iliad. Let me share my screen so we can read together here. I'm just going to continue walking you through this. So you can just relax and follow along. What I hope that you do is, after watching these videos or attending this class with me, I hope that you go back and read it by yourself and sort of process all the information and make it your own. And then when we're done with book one, even though it'll take a while, what I hope you do after we're done with book one is go back to the actual course and complete the first lesson, complete the assessment, get all of that work done. And then if you just work with me in these live classes, we'll just walk through these courses and get all of this stuff done in the best way possible. So that's what I'd like you to do. That's what I hope you do with these courses. I hope you just follow me through the studies, and then when we're finished with each lesson, you turn around, get the work done, and submit it. So we're going to continue working through lesson one here, and it'll take some time. Okay, as for the story, as for what we've read so far, we started out by talking about what the Trojan War was and what the cause of the Trojan War was. We said that there was a great evil committed by Paris, the prince of Troy, when he visited the house of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, that he basically stole Menelaus's wife, the queen, Helen, and he took her back to Troy. And then Menelaus, being offended and dishonored by that, called his fellow kings, his fellow friends, who were kings of other city-states throughout Greece, and they formed a great army, and they traveled to Troy by sea to take her back and to right this wrong, to punish Paris for what he did. And so that's what the Trojan War was. It was a war between the great city-states of Greece against the city of Troy because of a wrong that the ruler of the city of Troy committed. We talked about who the Greek army was. It was these kings or rulers, or chiefs, I should say, of different city-states of Greece. Greece wasn't a country like we think of in modern times. Greece was just really a land, and it had large cities that sort of ran like their own states, like the United States of America. And they had their own chiefs or leaders. And then whenever something happened, or if there was a war and Greece was in trouble, those different cities would organize together and form armies and represent Greece, but there was no real nation of Greeks. There was no king of Greece. But when they got together, they knew who the leader was because of his armies and because of his wealth and things like that. And so when the Greek cities got together, their leader was a man named Agamemnon, who was the brother of Menelaos, who was the king whose wife was stolen. Menelaos was the leader of the army, and he's referred to in this reading as the son of Atreus. That's one name he's referred to by. He's referred to as King of Kings. He's referred to as the King of Men, and so on, because he's the leader of the Greek armies. So that's Agamemnon. Among the Greeks, the most famous and greatest warrior was Achilles. Achilles is a great warrior. He's the son, according to the story, he's the son of a goddess named Thetis. So he's sort of a half man, half god. That's why they call him God-like Achilles. He was the greatest of the warriors. So while Agamemnon was the greatest of the rulers, when it was time for battle, Achilles was the one who got the work done. He's the most famous warrior, and we saw at the beginning of this story that the theme of this poem, the theme of this story is the anger or the rage of Achilles. Obviously, living in a day when men fought hand to hand with swords and javelins and spears, obviously you had to have a certain mentality for a battle like that. It wasn't about being clever or smart so much as being more violent and destructive than anybody else, more courageous than anybody else. And that's the kind of man that Achilles was. So we read about the beginning of the Trojan War, and then we read that the Greek army, it's important for us to remember that the Greek army in the Trojan War, they were the good guys. They were fighting with just cause. They were the good guys. And so we should expect them to have the assistance of the gods, and we should expect them to win the war. But as we see in the story, all of a sudden a plague breaks out among the Greek armies, and the Greeks understood that a thing like that could only happen if the gods allowed it or caused it. And so we're stuck with this problem, which is, why is a plague breaking out and killing mountains of Greek people when they should have the favor of the gods, because they're fighting the just cause in this battle? And we learned that the reason why the plague broke out was because Agamemnon, the king or the ruler of the Greek armies, he offended and insulted a priest of the god Apollo. And because he insulted this priest, Apollo came to take vengeance for his priest and for his own name, and attacked the Greek armies with this plague. So that's the story of how the plague develops. And then the exact problem was that Agamemnon, in their military victories from battle, they took captives and they took all kinds of plunder and riches from the people that they defeated. And one of these rewards that they had taken was a girl. And this wasn't just any girl. This was actually the daughter of the priest. Her name was Chryseis. His name is Chryses, just like her name, a little different. But Agamemnon had taken this priest's daughter in among his captives, and this priest came to Agamemnon to ask for her to be released, and Agamemnon disrespected him and basically said, "Get out of here. I don't care about your emotional plea. I don't care about your religion or your priesthood. She's mine by right, and you need to get out of here." And that's why Apollo punished the Greeks, because of Agamemnon's treatment of his priest. So then the Greeks are trying to figure out what in the world is going on, why they're suffering this plague. And so finally, Achilles calls the Greeks together and says, "We've got to figure out what's going on here, why this plague has broken out." And he asks if there are any prophets or old wise men or seers who have any idea why this plague might be destroying the Greek armies. And a man named Calchas stands up and answers. We read this in our last meeting. Calchas stands up and says, I know why. And the reason why is because of Agamemnon, what Agamemnon has done. And so Calchas, the prophet, points the finger at Agamemnon and says, he's the one, he did it. It's not the Greek army's fault. There are no problems with the Greeks. It's the leader. He's the one who caused this plague, and he has to make it right by returning this girl to the priest. Agamemnon is angry, and he sort of he despises this prophet, but he agrees to give up the girl. Agamemnon agrees to give up the girl on one condition. The Greeks have to give him a replacement. That means that someone of the Greeks has to give up his rewards. And yeah, women were considered rewards in battle. But one of the Greeks would have to give up one of his captive in order to repay the king, Agamemnon, for giving up his. So Agamemnon said he would do it, but he would only do it if she was replaced by someone else's woman, as it were. And this, of course, made Achilles angry. Achilles said that this was ridiculous because the king already has everything, and now he's going to take somebody else's prize, and they're about to defeat the city of Troy. And if he was just patient and waited until the city was conquered, he could have whatever he wanted from the city, but he's too greedy. And so Achilles criticizes Agamemnon of being too greedy. And that's where we left off in this story, okay? So then Agamemnon says, look, I'll return the girl and end this plague, but one of you has to replace her for me. I demand, as the leader of the armies, I demand that I not have my prize taken away and not be replaced. So that's where we left off in the story. And our first goal here is to understand the cause of the fight between Agamemnon and Achilles. That's the real theme of this whole book, of this whole story, is this fight between Agamemnon and Achilles. And we're seeing in book one, we're seeing this fight develop. We're seeing the fight between Achilles and Agamemnon develop. And that's the main theme of the story. All right, so let's keep reading today, and we'll pick up where we left off, and just, again, slowly making our way through this first book, just to make sure that everything is crystal clear. And you can read this for yourself afterwards and understand what's going on. So let's pick up where we left off. In the book, just so you know, I'm as far as the document is concerned, I'm on page 41 here. But if you look at the page in the book, it's just page 6. Okay, so we're going to pick up. So Agamemnon has just finished speaking, explaining that he's willing to return Chryseis, but she needs to be replaced by someone else's woman, as it were. And then we read, at this, Pelides, that's Achilles. He's called Pelides because that means son of Peleus. Peleus is his father. At this, Pelides, Achilles, frowning stern, replied, O tyrant, armed with insolence and pride, inglorious slave to interest ever joined, with fraud unworthy of a royal mind, what generous Greek, obedient to thy word, shall form an ambush or shall lift the sword? What cause have I to war at thy decree? The distant Trojans never injured me. To Phthyia's realms no hostile troops they led. Safe in her vales my warlike coursers fed. Far hence removed, the horse resounding mane, and walls of rocks secure my native reign, whose fruitful soil luxuriant harvests grace, rich in her fruits and in her martial race. So right here, Achilles responds to Agamemnon and says, O tyrant armed with insolence and pride, you arrogant king. That's what he says to Agamemnon. And the reason why he accuses Agamemnon of being arrogant is because he argues that Agamemnon is not thankful or appreciative of the fact that all of these Greek soldiers have joined him in this war, And this war has nothing to do with any of them. None of them are in danger. It's not like there's an invasion and they have to fight to protect their own lands. They're all living perfectly at peace and safe at home, minding their own business when this offense takes place in Sparta, where Agamemnon's brother is offended, and all of these Greek men come to the assistance of Agamemnon and his brother, and then Agamemnon treats them like they're a bunch of slaves. So Achilles is annoyed with Agamemnon's behavior. And that's why what Achilles is talking there is how he was back home, where in his land where he comes from, where everything is peaceful and calm. He says, safe in her valleys, my warlike coursers fed. In other words, my horses were living out in the pasture, eating peacefully. Far hence removed, far away from here, far away from the noisy sea, and walls of rocks secure my native reign, whose fruitful soil luxuriant harvests grace, rich in her fruits and in her martial race. So he's saying, my home city where I'm from, everything is at peace. Our city is surrounded by great stone walls. Our fields are fertile and we've got luxurious farmland. Everything is peaceful. Our land is rich in fruits and strong militarily. We have no reason to be here, and we come here to assist you, and this is how you respond to us. This isn't right, Achilles is arguing. Hither we sailed to this place, a voluntary throng. We had no necessary reason to be here. We came here voluntarily to avenge a private wrong. This isn't some public offense. This isn't some international problem. We came here to avenge your own family trouble. What else to Troy the assembled nations draws, but thine ungrateful and thy brother's cause? Is this the pay our blood and toils deserve, disgraced and injured by the man we serve? And darest thou threat to snatch my prize away, due to the deeds of many a dreadful day? You're going to take my prize after I've come here voluntarily to fight on behalf of your family problem? A prize as small, O tyrant, matched with thine, as thy own actions if compared to mine. Thine in each conquest is the wealthy prey, though mine the sweat and danger of the day. In other words, your prize is great, even though I'm the one who does the fighting. You don't do the fighting, Agamemnon. I'm the one. We're the ones who do the actual fighting. If anyone deserves a prize, it's the fighters, not the officers and the rulers who watch us fight. Some trivial present to my ships I bear, or barren praises pay the wounds of war. But know, proud monarch, I'm thy slave no more. My fleet shall waft me, shall carry me to Thessalia's shore, left by Achilles on the Trojan plain. What spoils, what conquests shall Atrides gain? So Achilles tells Agamemnon, you know what? That's it. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not willing to fight for you. I'm not willing to suffer and sacrifice for your sake. You're an arrogant, ungrateful king that treats the people who come to your assistance like a bunch of slaves. And Achilles basically says, I'm out of here. Okay, he says, I'm thy slave no more. My fleet shall waft me to Thessalia's shore, and you, being left by Achilles on the Trojan plain, what spoils, what conquests shall you gain? Okay, so Achilles calls Agamemnon out and does what workers always do, just like in business, when the bosses get arrogant and they become greedy for wealth and they take advantage of the workers. What do the workers do? They go on strike. They refuse to go to work. And what they do is they show the bosses that they can't exist without the workers. And then usually the bosses are forced make a deal with the workers and give the workers what they need. So it's as if Achilles calls the Greek soldiers to go on strike and refuse to fight for Agamemnon because he's so greedy and arrogant. So how does Agamemnon respond? Well, he responds arrogantly. To this, Achilles' warning, to this, the king responds, "Fly, mighty warrior, fly." In other words, go ahead, go. So Agamemnon is just arrogant and foolish. He says, "Fly, mighty warrior, fly. Thy aid we need not." We don't need you, Achilles. You can go. Nobody cares. "Thy aid we need not, and thy threats defy. There want not chiefs in such a cause to fight, and Jove himself shall guard a monarch's right." So he appeals to Jupiter as like the defender and benefactor of any king, which is obviously false because this king is sinning. So he appeals to God as his defense, and all crazy people do that when they're bad. You'll notice that when people are bad and they sin against other people and they're admonished for their sins by other people, they often think that God will be on their side, even if other people leave them because they're wicked. They still have this crazy idea that God is with them, even though they're the ones doing evil things. And that's how Agamemnon was here. Of all the kings, the gods distinguished care, to power superior none such hatred bear. Strife and debate thy restless soul employ, and wars and horrors are thy savage joy. If thou hast strength, 'twas heaven that strength bestowed. And again, this is what people always do with false religion. He says to Achilles, if you are strong, it's not because there's anything valuable in you. It's just because the gods gave you strength. Well, if that's true, then Achilles should be respected. But what we see here is Agamemnon is an example of a person who twists religion into this self-serving idea that the gods are with him and they're not with anybody else, and that other people aren't important because the gods just do everything anyway, so it doesn't matter if I trample people. The gods are with me, and I can find other people. I don't need you, Achilles. You may be great, but it's just because the gods made you great. And you know what? The gods can make somebody else great if they want to, so we don't need you. That's twisted religion. For no vain man, thy valor is from God. Haste, launch thy vessels, fly with speed away, rule thy own realms with arbitrary sway. I heed thee not, but prize at equal rate thy short-lived friendship and thy groundless hate. So he just tells Achilles that he's nuts, he's not needed, he's free to go, nobody cares. Go, threat thy earth-born Myrmidons, that's the name of Achilles' people, the Myrmidons. Go threaten your earth-born Myrmidons. Go threaten your weak little people. But here it is mine to threaten, prince, and thine to fear. Know if the god, the beauteous dame demand, my bark shall waft her to her native land. But then prepare, imperious prince, prepare, fierce as you are, to yield your captive fair. Even in thy tent, I'll seize the blooming prize. Thy loved Briseis, that's the name of the girl whom Achilles has as a captive. Thy loved Briseis with the radiant eyes, hence shalt thou prove my might and curse the hour thou stoodst a rival of imperial power. And hence to all our hosts it shall be known that kings are subject to the gods alone. So that's Agamemnon's response to Achilles' threat to leave. He basically says, and again, Agamemnon is an arrogant, prideful king who's just sort of lost his mind because of his power. He says kings don't need to pay attention to people. And we see that as a theme of this story, the idea that kings rule by divine power, and they don't need to pay attention to the people. They have the authority to do what they want, and the people are just like their servants who work under them. Achilles says, no, that's not how this works. If it's not for us sacrificing and fighting and doing good works, these kings have no power at all. So we've got this political lesson here in the Iliad. What really is the relationship between kings and their people? Are kings able to rule over their people like slaves? Do people have a right to oppose their king? We get into these complicated discussions politically. So when you do your assessment for this lesson, and it asks you about what does this lesson teach us about, let's say, moral philosophy? Well, moral philosophy has to do with politics. It teaches us to investigate this question of what exactly the relationship is between rulers and the people that they rule. Do kings have this sort of divine power to do whatever they want? Agamemnon argues that they do, that they don't have to listen to people. The kings rule, and he says the kings give count. The kings are subject to the gods alone, not to the people. And then you've got the argument of Achilles that the kings wouldn't even be kings if it weren't for the people. And so you've got this question of politics, right? What is the relationship? What is the true relationship between a ruler and his people? So that's a good theme to pay attention to as we go through this work. Okay, so Agamemnon says, not only do I demand a replacement for the woman that I'm going to give back, but actually, you know what, Achilles? I've decided that I'm going to take your woman. She's going to be the replacement. And no matter what you do, I'm going to send my men, and my men are going to come and take her, and there's nothing that you're going to do about it. So he just adds more insult to Achilles and makes him even more angry. And again, remember, go back to the first line of this story, sing the wrath of Achilles, right? This anger of Achilles is what we're going to focus on. And we see now this fight really beginning to take shape between Achilles and Agamemnon. And you should understand the cause of that fight and what actually led to this separation of the leader of the Greeks and the Greeks' greatest warrior. Okay, so Achilles hears this. He hears Agamemnon's words. Achilles heard, and with grief and rage oppressed, his heart swelled high and labored in his breast. Distracting thoughts by turns his bosom ruled, and now, fired by wrath. So at one moment, Achilles was so angry that it was like his mind was on fire. But then he would think, and now by reason cooled, he would calm himself down by thinking and talking to himself. That prompts his hand to draw the deadly sword, force through the Greeks, and pierce their haughty lord. So Achilles at this point was actually thinking of just running upon Agamemnon and killing him, which he could have done. This whispers soft his vengeance to control and calm the rising tempest of his soul. Just as in anguish of suspense he stayed, while half unsheathed appeared his glittering blade. Minerva, seeing him, the goddess, Minerva is another name for the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Minerva, seeing this, seeing him being tempted to kill Agamemnon, Minerva, swift, descended from above, sent by the sister and the wife of Jove, for both the princes claimed her equal care. Behind she stood, and by the golden hair Achilles seized, to him alone confessed, a sable or brown cloud concealed her from the rest. He sees, and sudden to the goddess cries, known by the flames that sparkle from her eyes. So what happens at this point in the story is the goddess Minerva comes down to appear to Achilles. She appears to him and only to him, so no one else sees her, and he sees her and recognizes who she is. And then he talks to her in this following line. Known by the flames that sparkle from her eyes. Descends Minerva in her guardian care, a heavenly witness of the wrongs I bear from Atreus' son. Then let those eyes that view the daring crime behold the vengeance too. So Achilles says to Minerva or Athena, he says, you've come down from heaven and you have seen the evil that Agamemnon has done. You know that Agamemnon has done this evil, and I'm going to make him pay for it. He says, you have beholden the daring crime, and you're about to see that crime avenged too. So he speaks to the goddess, and it's sort of like a prayer. It's like talking to God when you're upset or frustrated and just venting your feelings. So it's as if Achilles is praying to this goddess, just trying to deal with the anger that he has in this situation. Forbear. So now she speaks to him, the goddess speaks to Achilles. Forbear, in other words, calm down. Forbear, the progeny or child of Jove replies. To calm the fury, to calm thy fury, I forsake the skies. I have come to calm you down. Let great Achilles to the gods resigned, to reason yield the empire or his mind. So the goddess, and she's the goddess of wisdom, remember, she comes to Achilles and she says, look, I know you've got these two things going on inside your mind. You've got this great anger that's being provoked by Agamemnon, but you've got to subject that anger to reason. You've got to rule over your anger. Anger is just a natural passion. Anger is like a fire. It will go on forever if it's provoked, but you've got to rule over that passion with reason. That's what it means to be a human being. So this goddess of wisdom comes to Achilles when he's tempted by anger to murder the king. And she tells him to rule over his anger with reason. And so we see that this is what it means to be wise. In life, many people will do bad things to us. There's no way to prevent that, and it'll provoke us to anger. But we're not allowed to just let that anger run wild. That's not reasonable. You can say, well, he did it. He made me angry. Yeah, so what? You are responsible to rule over your anger with reason and control yourself. So the anger is just a natural passion. You, however, are a rational creature, and you've got to rule over that natural passion with your reason. God allows us to have anger because anger is actually necessary to live a good life. We need to be angry at times. For example, if we're sinning and we're stuck in bad habits, one of the ways that we get out of those bad habits and actually change our lives is to get angry at ourselves. It's anger that often leads us to improve our lives and to change. Anger often helps us to break a bad relationship, to end a friendship that's not good for us. Anger is often used for good. It moves us to do things, and that's the purpose of anger. But anger can also move us to do ridiculous, foolish things. And so we've got to rule over our anger by reason to judge whether or not our anger is acting rightly and is leading us to something good, or whether our anger is acting wrongly and leading us to return evil for evil. So we've got to rule over that anger. And that's what Minerva comes to tell Achilles, that he's got to control this anger. Now, if you remember in our first lesson, I talked about how the pagans, these are people living long before the Christian church was ever established. I talked about their religion. And here again, we're learning about Greek religion. I talked about their religion, and I said Christians often get upset when we talk about gods and goddesses, and they think it's good to say, nah, there's no such thing as gods and goddesses. There's only one God. There's only one God, the Christian God, and this is all false. There's no such thing as gods and goddesses. And I said in the first lesson that that's really not a reasonable response, because what we have to understand is that these people, they didn't know about God. They didn't have divine revelation. And what they called gods and goddesses, we don't have to understand them to be gods and goddesses like they're replacements of God. What they clearly were in the ancient world were spirits. And so because these spirits were eternal, they were greater than men, and people knew that they were greater than men, they called them gods and goddesses simply to say that they're some kind of superhuman beings, superhuman creatures that exist, and they refer to them as gods and goddesses. If you read the Bible, you'll see that that's exactly how angels and demons are described. They're described as superhuman spirits. They're like gods and goddesses in the fact that they're more powerful. We read, for example, in the Old Testament that there was a war where the Assyrians were attacking the Jews, and God sent an angel. God sent one angel, and we're told that the angel killed 180,000 Assyrian soldiers. So this idea that these spirits, that these angels are superhuman in their power, that's Christian teaching. So we understand that there are angels and demons. And when we read these stories, we read that these ancient pagan peoples were aware, they believed that there were these spirits active in the world, and they called them gods and goddesses. And rather than get all upset about that, if we simply understand and think about what they're talking about and change these words, gods and goddesses, to angels, all of a sudden these stories make a lot more sense. And some people want to say that, well, these gods and goddesses, they're all wicked, they're all evil, they're think about what Minerva is doing here, and ask yourself if this is the kind of thing that evil spirits do. You've got Achilles, who's being provoked to anger by the unjust behavior of the king. He's provoked to anger, and he's thinking about killing the king. This spirit, Minerva, comes to Achilles and tells him that he's got to rule over his anger with reason and calm down. Does that sound like the kind of thing that demons do? Do evil spirits tell angry men to calm down and not do violence? Do evil spirits come to men when they're provoked to anger and tell them to be patient and to be peaceful and not respond with anger? No, that's not what evil spirits do. That's what good spirits do. I don't know if you've ever seen a cartoon. Sometimes cartoons will show a person and they've got like an angel on one shoulder and a demon on the other shoulder, and they're both kind of talking to him, giving him advice as to what he should do. The angel is telling him to be good. The demon is telling him to be bad. And we've got that image of these good and evil spirits trying to influence us, but we are in control. We have to make decisions because we have free will. These spirits, they can influence us. They can tempt us and suggest things to us. If they suggest something bad, we call that a temptation. If they suggest something good, we call that an inspiration. So we've always got these good and evil influences on us, but God gives us the freedom to make the choice, and God always gives us the strength to have the freedom to make the choice. And this is what we see going on in this story here. We see a man who is right and just in his cause being provoked to anger, being tempted to violence by this king. He's ready to kill this guy for his arrogant talk, being provoked to anger. And this spirit comes and tells him to use reason and calm down. That is not what evil spirits do in our lives. They don't tell us to calm down and be patient, especially when we're ready to commit some great evil. So the argument that these gods and goddesses are all just evil ideas that the Greeks make up in their own imagination, the story doesn't support that argument, because these spirits, many of these spirits, not all of them and not all the time, but many of these spirits and many of these events, the spirits are actually doing good things. They're teaching us good moral lessons. So what moral lessons do we learn from this reading? We learn that the gods teach us to rule over anger and other passions by reason, that we should be governed by reason. That's a very important moral lesson. That's what we're trying to teach in the study of ethics and Christian catechism. So we see Minerva teaching that lesson here to Achilles. All right. So Minerva comes to him and tells him to calm down. She has come, she's forsaken the skies to come down. She says, let great Achilles to the gods resigned, to reason yield the empire o'er his mind. So calm down, trust the gods, calm down, everything's okay, she tells Achilles. By awful Juno, Juno is the queen of heaven, by awful Juno, this command is given. The king and you, Agamemnon and you, are both the care of heaven. And again, this feeds into that theme that I talked about before. What does this story teach us about politics? Minerva comes and tells Achilles, it's not true that the gods are just with the kings and the people are the slaves of the king. That's not true. She says, the king and you are both the care of heaven. So here we have religious teaching that applies to moral teaching. We have a teaching about how religion and politics go together. The kings are to understand that the gods don't just care about them alone, and the people are not just their slaves to be treated like cattle, but the people are also dear to the gods, and the gods also love the people. And so when the king deals with his people, he's got to honor the god and deal with the people respectfully, as if he's serving God himself as he serves the people. But the people also have to respect authority and realize that God desires authority and God establishes authority. And so both sides have to fear the gods. The people have to fear the king, and the king has to fear the people, because God loves both. So there's an important lesson on moral philosophy. The king and you are both the care of heaven. The force of keen reproaches let him feel. In other words, you have the right to criticize him and, argue with him. Let him feel the force of keen reproaches, sharp responses, sharp criticisms. But sheathe, obedient, thy revenging steel. Put your sword away. In the Gospels, when Jesus is arrested, St. Peter pulls out his sword as if he's going to fight to protect Jesus. And Jesus tells Peter to put his sword away. And Jesus tells Peter, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. The reason, what that means is that if you try to, if when people do evil things to you, you always try to fight back and get vengeance, it's just going to come back to you, because you're going to fight back and do vengeance. You're going to do wrong to someone else. Then they're going to be made angry. Then they're going to come after you for their vengeance. And it's going to go back and forth, and these fightings and wars never stop. So If you're the kind of person who gets angry and seeks revenge, thinking that once you get your revenge, then you'll have peace, both ancient religion and the Christian religion teach you that you're lying to yourself, because you're not going to get peace. You're just going to start an endless back and forth of vengeance and revenge, and it's going to go on forever. So when she says, sheathe thy revenging steel. She's referring to the sword as this instrument by which men seek to get revenge when they suffer wrong. And the gods are telling him that this is contrary to reason and that he should put away this sword. Just like Jesus says to Peter in the gospel, if you choose to live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. You're not going to get peace. You're just going to have endless fighting, endless wars. Put that sword away, she says. Talk about it, argue about it, but put that sword away. That's not how you solve this problem. So lots of moral instruction, lots of moral philosophy here from this discussion between Achilles and Minerva. She says, thy injured honor, so his honor has been offended by this disrespect from Agamemnon. She says, your injured honor has its fated hour. So she basically says to him, your time will come. You will have honor. It's been fated. It's your destiny. You will have honor. But this is not how you seek it. Your injured honor has its fated hour. Your time will come. When the proud monarch shall thy arms implore, when Agamemnon shall beg for your help, your time is coming. Your time will come where you will be honored. Agamemnon will one day beg for your help. So the goddess is actually telling Achilles the future and calming him down by saying, you will be honored, so calm down and stop responding to this man. He doesn't control the future. The gods control the future. So trust in the gods, rule over your anger, and be assured that if you live virtuously, you will receive honor. But this is not how you get it. You don't have to fight for it against your own people. When the proud monarch shall thy arms implore and bribe thy friendship with a boundless store, the day will come when Agamemnon begs for your help. Your time will come. Then let revenge no longer bear the sway. Command thy passions, and the gods obey, period. That's Minerva's message to Achilles, okay? So that's where we're going to stop our reading today, and I want you to see how much important information we have in this little short reading. We've got a lot of important information that really helps us to understand this story, and not just this story, but ancient religion. And I don't care what anybody says, this religious teaching here that Minerva gives Achilles is good religious teaching. This is good teaching even if you're a Christian. This is good religious teaching. This is good moral philosophy. So Minerva tells Achilles that just because someone did something wrong to him, he doesn't have a right to grab his sword and go seek vengeance. That's not how life works. He's got to learn to bear wrongs patiently. And this is one in the Christian faith, this is one of the works of mercy, learning to bear wrongs patiently. Just because someone does something wrong to you doesn't mean you're allowed to go and beat people up and kill people because you've been offended. That's not reasonable. Think about what Jesus teaches. If someone strikes you on the cheek, turn to him the other cheek. That's what it means to bear wrongs patiently. And that's what Minerva comes to tell Achilles to do. She tells him to turn the other cheek. That's what she says. And this is an example of what it means to turn the other cheek. And that's the advice of this goddess Minerva. So it's hard for me to believe that some evil spirit is coming to, some evil spirit, some false god is coming to tell Achilles to act the way that Jesus teaches us to act. That doesn't make any sense. This spirit is coming and is telling Achilles to do good, to act wisely, to rule over his passions with reason. We have this line here at the end: command thy passions, and the gods obey. Obey the gods and command thy passions. That's good Christian teaching, okay? Obviously, we don't believe that there are multiple gods, but we understand why in the ancient world, before Christianity even came, we understand why pagans would believe that these spirits are in fact gods, because they're superhuman creatures. But the message of message of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, to Achilles is: calm down, rule over your anger with reason, and be patient, because your time will come. And that's exactly what Christianity teaches us today. Don't return evil for evil. Turn the other cheek. God tells us not to seek vengeance. He says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. And in this life, we simply trust. We trust that God always knows what's going on. We trust that everything is always in God's control. We trust that God will always give us what we deserve, and God will settle all the problems, and we don't have to take all of these fights into our own hands. So the lesson that Achilles learns here is the same lesson that God would teach us in that situation. Command thy passions, and the gods obey. So that's the lesson here in this reading. And what we see is this fight was about to break up Agamemnon and Achilles. Achilles was about to literally kill Agamemnon. And the gods stepped in, calmed Achilles down, saved Agamemnon's life. And now, as we read the story and we see how it ends, you have to remember that if the story was allowed to go the way men wanted it to go, Achilles would have killed Agamemnon. But the gods intervened, calmed Achilles down, and now everything else we read about this story is a result of the gods intervening, calming Achilles down, and allowing a good result to come out of this trouble. So if Achilles was left to himself, Agamemnon would likely be dead, or Achilles would be dead. But the gods intervened. The gods taught him to be merciful and to bear this wrong patiently, and to trust that his time would come. And Achilles, we'll see in our next reading, obviously listens and obeys the gods. So we see in Achilles, and again, all of this detail is important. We see in Achilles a man who's very passionate. Very passionate. He gets angry. He's a great warrior. He's a passionate man. He's a virtuous man. But we also see in Achilles that when his passion really gets him into trouble, he is able to control himself. He fears the gods. He listens to reason. He calms himself down, and he doesn't do destructive things. So we see in Achilles a man who's dangerous because he's passionate. But we see a man who is passionate, but at the same time can control himself. And so we have Achilles presented to us as a model of virtue, right? St. Paul in the New Testament says, be angry, but do not sin. That's what St. Paul says in the New Testament. Be angry, but do not sin. You have to be angry because anger, like I said, it's a passion that helps us to stop sinning, to resist evil, to break bad habits, and so on. That's what anger does. It helps us to fight for justice, which is a virtue. But we have to be careful not to allow anger to lead us into sin. So be angry, but do not sin. We see that's what Minerva counsels Achilles here, and Achilles submits to that message from the gods. He's a man with self-control. Even though he's got great anger, he's got that anger like a wild horse. He's got it under control with a bridle on it, and he can rein it in and keep it calm. So that's our lesson for today. We see this a very important moral lesson from the goddess Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, coming and helping Achilles when he's provoked to murder. We're going to see that she calms him down, that he does in fact put his sword away and bear this wrong patiently. And then in the end, good things come to him, at least to a degree, because he chose to listen to the gods at this time and be patient. So that's our reading for today. We stop off there. We didn't get through much in the way of actual lines of text, but we got through much in the sense that we've learned some important lessons about Greek religion and philosophy and this character of Achilles. So that's all for today. If you don't have any questions, you're free to go. If you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but that's all for today's meeting. So we'll pick up again in our reading next week. Read this on your own. After we go through these lessons, read through it on your own, because you'll see now it all makes sense. And you'll kind of make this story your own, because you'll be able to read it and understand it. So take advantage of the opportunity you have. After you've been through the class, now go read it for yourself, and you'll be able to enjoy this story and read it without a teacher in the future, or maybe even teach others. So I hope that's helpful. If I don't see you until next week, have a good week. But most of you I see almost daily, so I'll see you during our next live class. God bless everybody.